Hello, it's Adedoyin Jaiyesimi here, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I want to talk to you about 4 things that I do before I create any communications plan. I think that one of my most frequently asked questions from communications professionals, both senior, even my peers, how do you create a communications plan? And there's a whole conversation. What is the difference between a plan and a strategy? I'm not going into that, but I want to tell you about what I do when I need to create a communications plan, and I hope that you'll be able to adopt it when you're creating yours as well. So, number 1, I ask questions about what the organization wants to achieve, because I really need to understand the context, especially when I'm coming on board as an advisor or as a consultant. So I'm coming as an external person. I don't know this organization, or even if I know the organization, I don't understand the inner workings. I don't know what you guys want to achieve, all of that. I really have to get an understanding. So I really ask a lot of questions. Now, I remember sharing with someone about this a while back, and the comment the person made was, what if the organization is not forthcoming with answers? And I've really experienced that, where you're asking important questions so that you can do your work well and properly, but they won't give you the questions. So what I have done to also mitigate that is, instead of sending them, because before I would send a list of questions that I would hope that they will answer, what I would ask them is to give me contact person. So even as part of the contract or the engagement phase, I put it there that I have or I need information, and they should please give me contact people that will be able to provide the information that I need to even begin the job. So what I do is I schedule like a 1-hour Zoom call, which is like a fact-finding conversation where I get to ask the questions, and those conversations are really enlightening, and it cuts across different departments, again depending on how huge the scope of that communications plan is. Anyway, the bottom line of all of this is I ask a lot of questions. I look at the brief, I look at what the organization wants to achieve, and because I've been doing this for over 13 years, I already know the questions that I need to be asking. So you need to sit down when you want to create a communications plan, or when you're given that assignment. What are the key things that you need to be able to ask to get the answers to, that will allow you to create a solid and effective communications plan that will give you the measurable results? The next thing I do after I've done my fact-finding conversations, I've gotten the internal insights, is to begin my research. I start researching the industry the organization belongs to. In fact, I started even researching about the organization itself, what's out there about the organization on Google. I ask for things like annual reports, their strategic documents. Interestingly, some organizations don't have this, so yeah, it can be quite interesting sometimes. But I ask for all of this documentation, and I begin my research. And what I'm trying to do with the research is, again, to also understand the context. So I have an idea of the internal context, but I want to understand externally. Is this organization operating as a thought leader? Where is this organization in terms of communications? Where is this organization in terms of operation? Even within the industry, where does this organization rank? Because all of those things will feed in to the communications plan that I will create. And I do that, when I do that, okay, if the company is based in Ghana, I start with Ghana, then I zoom wider, Africa and globally, because again, your communications plan, it has to be like global standard, right? So I zoom out that way, but my research is very, very thorough. I will use media monitoring tools like Brand24 to get relevant insights, to understand what is the sentiment towards this brand, what are people even saying. So all of that information, I gather it before I even begin to think about what this plan should look like and where or what direction this communications plan needs to be focused on. The next thing that I do is to speak to the target audience. From the point in which I start the fact-finding conversations, I'm already thinking about the assumptions that the organization is making, because I also find that we tend to make assumptions about our target audience, about our stakeholders, without necessarily engaging them to get their feedback and their comments. A lot of organizations that I have engaged with, they have never done an audience survey. They've never done a stakeholder survey. And I would ask them, so how do you know that your stakeholder wants this? How do you know that this is how your audience feels? If you've never asked, if you do not know their pressing problems, if you do not understand the questions that they need answers to. So I make sure that I do that research to speak to the target audience. Now, depending on how big the brief is, I might do a comprehensive survey, or I just get a feel for, okay, this is the person, or these are the group of people this organization is targeting, and I can use things like LinkedIn, Google Form, SurveyMonkey, Typeform to just get some sort of data. And if I have one-on-one access to some of the people within that target group, I have conversation. I remember a time a child clothing brand reached out to me to do some work for them, and I had questions that they were not answering, but I remembered, hey, I have access to the target groups that are now parents that are buying the clothes that this organization or this brand sells, and I reached out to a few of them to understand, why do you choose other brands and not this brand? And it was very, very enlightening just having those conversations. Please do not create a communications plan and you haven't spoken or touched base with the audience and the stakeholders or the target stakeholders of this organization. In fact, another thing that I've realized is also to have a thorough understanding of this organization, because they can tell you, oh, we're targeting women, but in your research and in your fact finding, you can then find out, hey, there's actually an influencing audience that you're not taking into consideration. You're focused on women, but you do not realize that the men in their lives, their fathers, husbands, are the ones who make or influence them to make this decision with regards to your product or services. So ignoring those male figures is going to make whatever communication plan you create dead on arrival. So I make sure that I do a thorough audience and stakeholder analysis and make sure that I touch base with the audience group, stakeholder group, to get the relevant insights that I can feed into my communications plan. The next thing that I do is I review what already exists. Look, I have done countless communications plans, and the truth is that hardly ever are you reinventing the wheel. It's not impossible, but a lot of times you're already building on what already exists. You're already building on best practice. You're already building or iterating on what someone has done successfully, or it's a merger of different bits and bobs of things that have worked or things that are already in the public domain, and you tweak and you iterate for the context that you're working with. So I like to review, because again, that review also gives me inspiration of what is possible. So I review what has been done in other industries, I review what has been done in other countries, I review what has been done in other regions, again, just to really understand what is already out there. What can I learn from what is already out there, and how can I be inspired? The goal is not to copy, but the goal is to open your mind, because when your mind is open, you can even think bigger and also develop something more creative and tailor something that will be unique to the organization or brand that you're creating the communications plan for. And then after doing all of these things, I then begin to work on my communications plan. So I put in the background and the context, go through the organizational objectives, define exactly what the strategy needs to be, break down the tactical approach, the channels that will be used, the activities that will be done, how this will be measured. I will define that, create the implementation timeline and calendar. I synthesize and bring all of that together. But you see, all the things that I mentioned earlier before, I also define, of course, the key messages, the kinds of content to be created. But the point is that all of the things that I did before makes it a seamless and smooth flow in terms of creating the communications plan. So I'm not scratching my head, and I'm not delivering something that when they begin to implement, it will not give them the results that they want. And the bonus points in all of these things that I do is, look, I can't just create a communications plan and just say, hey, here's the communications plan. I really have to highlight to the organization, especially when the research has highlighted certain gaps. If I find that there are gaps in their culture, if I find that there are gaps in their product fit, if I also find that there is a gap in how this organization communicates in terms of its executives and leaders, it is my duty to point it out, because what would then happen is that, Adedoyin created this communications plan, we implemented the communications plan, it didn't work. But you will not say that, oh, it's your culture, it is your approach, it's the fact that you have a bad product. So I will be doing the organization a disservice if I do not highlight these things. And I always try to guide on best practices on implementation, that these factors need to be there. For example, budget. I also like to be very realistic. If you want to do this, be willing and ready to commit this amount. I'm also very clear about timelines, because when you're setting your objectives, they really need to be smart and realistic. So I'm not going to give them something that I know ideally for them to see results it's going to take 6 months to 1 year. So those are just some of the things, the steps that I take when I'm creating a communications plan. And I hope that you found that helpful. If you're like, what is Adedoyin talking about? Please go and watch my video about the comms planning process. And you can also watch my bite-sized communications comms course, because it's important that you're delivering your work with competence, with knowledge, not winging it. I am anti-wing it. I used to be on team winging it, but God has delivered me from that side. I'm team competent and able and capable. So thank you so much for watching. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you for watching. Bye.